Your job, our job, is to protect the American people. And this fierce virus can be managed if done correctly, correct?
I believe so.
And in fact, the playbook is established. It's testing, contact tracing, and then isolation, starting with first social isolation, correct?
Yes, those non-pharmaceutical interventions and testing are critical first steps.
Right, and in fact, this virus is across the world, and many countries that have followed that tried and true protocol have done far better than the US. Is that correct?
We have seen differences in the response and the outcomes of that response around the world.
I'll go through some of those. And you know, the Johns Hopkins study that said that the US had the best preparedness, it turned out we have the worst response, correct? With the most cases and the most deaths.
We have the most cases and the most deaths.
And I did some calculations. You know, on January 19th, South Korea determined its first case. On January 19th, the US determined its first case, correct?
January 20th was the US, yes.
All right. And if we had the same response as South Korea, by population, they had 33,000 deaths. We would have saved 50,000 lives. In Taiwan, they had the same virus, 22,000 deaths, and again, adjusting for population, that's 60,000 more deaths we've had here. Singapore, 82,000 more deaths. New Zealand, 65,000. The question for us here, and for the American people, is why? When we had the best plan, we had the worst execution. So let me go through a few things that you've established. One, beginning in January, before that first case here, FDA Chief Hahn asked the HHS if he could start contacting companies about possible shortages of protective equipment, and he got blown off by HHS, correct?
And I understand.
And on January 18th, before our first case, you pushed Dr. Kaldek to convene high-level meetings about the virus, but that was initially rejected, correct?
True.
And then on January 23rd, you demanded urgent access to funding personnel and clinical specimens to develop life-saving medicines. But you were told that the spread was under control, correct?
There wasn't a shared sense of urgency.
On January 25th, you warned others in the administration there's a critical need for procuring surgical masks. That was ignored, correct?
True.
On January 27th, you participated in the daily COVID-19 meeting where you expressed frustration with the slow pace of accessing virus samples and clinical specimens from China. You were reprimanded and you're no longer part of those meetings. Is that right?
That's true.
So you and others actually were seeing over the horizon what was coming to our shores, even before our first case was confirmed, correct?
We had spent many years preparing for a pandemic, sir, and we understood the threat. We understood what we needed to do.
Exactly. It's knowable and it's manageable. It's fierce and fearsome. But what you have to do is established. Is that more or less correct?
Yes, sir.
We just didn't do it. February 25th, President Trump gave an assurance that the stock market is starting to look very good and the coronavirus was very much under control. Were you aware of any medically involved people who had the view that the virus at that time was very much under control?
No, sir, I don't think the virus was under control. I don't think many people would agree with me in the scientific realm.
Now, in those countries I mentioned, it includes Germany, Taiwan, New Zealand, South Korea, Singapore. The leaders of those countries accepted that there was a role only the nation could play and the provinces would have to depend on them for that. And I want to go through some of those things. One, establishing a testing protocol. Was that done here?
No.
Two, acquiring and allocating and distributing the personal protective equipment to where it was needed, when it was needed. Was that done here?
No, sir.
In fact, we had governors and hospitals competing with each other to try to get desperately needed equipment. Isn't that correct?
There's a lot of confusion, a lot of competition, and bad decisions made to acquire poor quality product.
In any of those other countries that I just mentioned, are you aware of the leader of that country at a press conference making recommendations on what kind of medication people should use?
I don't know the details of what happened in those countries, sir, so I don't know.
All right. You know, we had governors here, Republicans and Democrats, Republicans like Hogan, like Phil Scott from Vermont, who have done a tremendous job. But no matter how good they do their job, can they protect their people without the aggressive intervention of the federal government playing its role?
I think the federal government plays a critical role in coordinating and aligning and making an equitable distribution of those critical supplies. I believe that's what we'd practice and exercise in the past, that there would be a critical role for the federal lead in coordination at the state, local, and tribal and territorial levels.
Thank you, Dr. Bright. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter.